Hello, welcome everybody. Thursday history tea time chat, history chat live. Sorry, I'm a little bit late for those of you who are very prompt and on time. I have no real excuse. Welcome if you're watching on the catch up. I'm streaming live on Instagram and on YouTube, but you can also always catch this afterwards on IGTV or back on YouTube, or indeed if you're listening on the podcast. But if you're here with me live, thank you very much for joining. I can see we have Anindita watching from India. Welcome. It's 6:30 in the evening there, so hopefully this is a nice wind up to your day. I was looking at some of your videos earlier, really cute, really good. And Colleen joining from California at 5 a.m. Oh, welcome. Good morning. I don't know whether to be really, do you want me to be really lively when it's 5 o'clock in the morning, or do you want me to be a little bit gentle? Welcome, Pete, joining from Canada. Who else have we got? Let me know. Yeah, let me know on Instagram. So on YouTube, I can post a comment that pins. So I've asked everyone to let me know where they are and what time of the day it is. Because although I call this tea time, because literally I have a cup of tea if I've managed to get one. I've been provided with this one today. But I realised that it could be wherever you are, a totally different time. Welcome, Marion. Hi. Thank you for joining me again. Thank you to everyone who normally comes and joins me. Louise in Surrey. I know what time it is where you are then. But also I'm getting new subscribers and new followers every day. So if you're new here, big warm welcome to you. So I do this each week, just a live history chat where we talk about hi Andrea from North Carolina. Welcome. Each week we talk about different history. Hi Janice. Janice, I've got something to say about you later, lady. And we talk about history, things that have been in the news or anniversaries, places I've been, let me tell you about. I've got a very exciting one for you to tell you about this week. Live events we've been doing, live events that are coming up. Seriously, I don't know when I sleep. When I go through this with you all, I'm like, this feels like a lot. But anyway, it's all very exciting stuff. So welcome. I've got my little bit of tech. Tracy saw me on Cat Show. Yes, well, we'll be talking about I'll talk to you about that as well. So because we do History After Dark and we do History Half Hours with me and Kat, Katherine Brooks, who's the Tudor tracker, and of course Sarah Morris, who's the Tudor travel guide. Hi Joanne, thank you for joining. So welcome everybody. So I'm covering today, let me give you a little bit of an insight into what we'll be talking about. We've had quite a few interesting things, anniversaries that have gone on, Tudor period wise mainly, but obviously we've had Remembrance Sunday. We spoke a lot about that last week. And patrons, you've got the blog obviously over on in Patreon about how we began remembering. That was what I wanted to write about. How did Britain and the rest of the world, but obviously from a British perspective, how did we start to remember? So I covered the Tomb of the Unknown Warrior, how the Unknown Warrior was selected, the process of that, his funeral, the Cenotaph, which was unveiled as part of that funeral procession, which was on Armistice Day 1920, and how the poppy began to be used. So patrons, you can go and read that blog if you haven't already. I also did a couple of reels, and one was I read the In Flanders Fields poem, which is the poem by the Canadian doctor John McCrae, who he wrote the poem in the First World War, and it's from that we get the inspiration for the poppy. So I read that. That's on Instagram. Can't remember if I put it on YouTube. Actually, I might have put it on YouTube as well. And that's quite a moving poem. So that's there. I've also done a merge of the Cenotaph on that funeral procession day in 1920, and you can see George V behind the coffin of the unknown warrior, because they paused at the cenotaph to unveil it. And so that picture I've morphed into one that I took when I was down in London in May, when London was dead. There was no one there. Thankfully, it's not like that now. But I got a good photo of the cenotaph with no traffic. So I've merged those two. So that, again, that's a reel on Instagram. Don't go yet. Go and have a look afterwards if you haven't seen that already. So there's a couple of things about remembrance. Anyway, what else were we going to do actually this week? So that was last week. Arthur and Katherine getting married. Arthur Tudor, Katherine of Aragon getting married. And a couple of things about Elizabeth I, because yesterday was the anniversary of Elizabeth I becoming queen. So, of course, also her sister Mary I dying. And it was also the day that I went all the way down to London, which is why I know it's not a ghost town anymore, to see this exhibition at the British Library. So the Elizabeth and Mary Queen of Scots exhibition at the British Library. So patrons, you're going to get photos, and also members on YouTube. So you can join. I'll tell you about that in a minute. But I'm going to be sharing, I'll share a few anyway, photos, but my patrons and members on YouTube, you'll get a lot more photos from this exhibition, because I found some interesting things with some of the artifacts that were on show that I hadn't either noticed before or was a bit different to what I expected to see anyway. So I will let you know, but we'll talk about that as well. If we've got time, we'll talk about, did Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn get married at Dover in November 1532 before their Whitehall wedding in January 1533? We'll talk about that if we have time. And also the British Library treasures. They have a sort of permanent exhibition on. Things move around it, but there's some incredible things in there. So if we have time, I'll tell you about that as well. But I can't run over today because I'm interviewing Leslie Smith at 2:30 for a future podcast. So I'll tell you a bit about what that's all about as well. But before I move on, I want to say a big welcome, a shout out to Janice, who has joined my Patreon in the upper class tier. So welcome, newest member, helping me get to my target of 20 patrons. So thank you very, very much. If you're not a patron and you just want to see what it's all about, you can go and over to patreon.com/British history. You can also join my YouTube channel now, which has different things like Anindita has, where you get, that's why Anindita has got that little badge next to her name. And Anindita, you have exclusive emojis that you can use as well, which is quite exciting. If you don't want to be a member but you want to support, then you can use super chats and super stickers on YouTube. On Instagram, you can just head over and have a look on YouTube if you fancy any of that. So right, let's get on to there is a virtual, it's not a tour, but a look around Blenheim Palace available to patrons today. And tomorrow, the podcast with Sarah Keeney that I've been going on, Antonia Keeney, sorry, about Sarah Churchill, that I've been going on about for weeks, is available to everybody from tomorrow. So if you're not, if you don't listen to my podcast already, it's going live as a YouTube video as well. But it's a podcast, and it's available. I don't know if you know that I have a podcast, but you can find that through the links on the top of my YouTube channel or in my bio on Instagram, and find the podcast. It's about 40 minutes long. Patrons, you've already got access to it, so you can go and check it out now. But we talk about Sarah Churchill. I've talked about her in length a couple of times on this History Chat Live already. So if you want to learn more about that, you can either wait for the podcast tomorrow, or you can have a look at the previous History Chat. But yeah, with Antonia Keeney and the fascinating story of Sarah Churchill. What a character. I think I've said before, I'm not sure I would have liked her. She's the first Duchess of Marlborough, for anyone who doesn't know. And it was it was her and her husband, but her in the end, because he predeceased her, who are responsible for getting Blenheim Palace finished. Or is it finished? That's in the podcast. So cool. So that's available tomorrow. Also, any of you who are history buffs and you like your books, Tracy Borman's book is out today, Crown and Scepter. I've actually pre-ordered it on Audible. No, not Audible. Yes, Audible. Can't remember if it's Audible or Kindle. Anyway, I have I've got my copy ready to start today, but you might be interested in that. And Tracy is actually she's speaking on all of my tours next year, which is very exciting. She's so nice. Such a nice person, such an incredible, knowledgeable historian. I'm reading one of her books at the moment about James I and the witch hunts that happened in James I's reign. And I'm getting a bit off what I was going to talk about now, but I'm sure you're interested. James, it's almost by accident he was so anti witchcraft, but you can be anti-witchcraft, but he was so sort of he wanted to find witches. He was convinced of witchcraft, and it grew a life of its own, these witch hunts. And of course, if you're saying there's witchcraft and the king is saying, I want you to go and find these witches, you don't go back to the king and say, I don't think there is witchcraft, there's no witches. There's always someone who is willing to go find them, and there were a lot of people willing to go find them. And of course they were mainly women. And it's a bit like, no, I'm not going to go into today's politics, but you could just say your neighbor was a witch, and then it was sort of up to them to disprove it. Anyway, I'm not that far through that book yet, so when I finish it, I'll let you know what it was like. But apparently Tracy's fiction trilogy about the witches, witches trilogy, is amazing. So if you're looking for a good quality historical fiction, then that's a good place to go. That's where I'm going to go next. Michael says you can find them in Witch magazine. Ha ha. Do you mean as in witch, as in a Witch Monthly? Or there's the witch magazine that tells you which appliances are safe and good to use, isn't it? Is that witch? I don't know. But if you're interested, there's only 4. I've only got 4 spaces left on tours next year. They're on the On Progress with Anne Boleyn tour, and Tracy Borman is coming to speak to us at Hever Castle. So if you're interested in that, you can check that or the whole itinerary out on BritishHistoryTours.com. On Progress with Anne Boleyn. They're the only spaces I've got left that Tracy is speaking on. Now, this week I've mentioned my reel about the Cenotaph. Marion, I'm a witch, they put this nose on me. I've got a little bit of it doesn't show up on screen, or I hope it doesn't. Hi Lisa, welcome. Yeah. I'm quite glad I didn't live in James the first time, to be fair. I could have been in trouble. So I've mentioned I've got the Cenotaph reel out. Another one you might be interested in looking at is one of Westminster Abbey. And it's funny because I found yes, Michael, hello. I found a picture, an old picture of Westminster Abbey with St Margaret's Church in front about 2 weeks ago, and I was looking, no, maybe a little bit longer, when I was preparing my talk about the history of Westminster and Whitehall. But I happened to, when I was down there in May, the same time as I took the picture of the Cenotaph, I happened to have taken a picture from not exactly the same angle, but a very similar angle, and without traffic. There's a black cab in there actually, and I've again done a merge so that you can see today versus, I think it was in Victorian times, the sketches. See which one you prefer. I'd be interested to know. But yeah, so that's on as a reel as well, so you can check that out. Now, the other videos that are out are about Arthur and Catherine, their wedding, and Elizabeth I and Mary I. So should we start with Arthur? Arthur was also the topic of our Visit Tudor Britain Instagram live, which I do with Deb Royal at Tudor Times and Sarah Morris, the Tudor travel guide. We were on Sarah's handle last Friday, where we talked about places associated with. No, we weren't. We were on Deb's Tudor.times. Have a look at Tudor.times for In the Footsteps of Arthur. Hi, Andrew. Oh, keeping you company while you're on your break from work. So places to do with Arthur. So we did that on Friday, and also then we followed straight on with a clubhouse room about the wedding of Arthur and Katherine of Aragon. So you can actually now, this is new, you can actually go onto Clubhouse and listen to a playback of selected rooms. So we're not going to have all rooms on playback, I don't think, but that one from Friday about Arthur and Katherine's wedding is available. So if you're on Clubhouse, you can go and check that out. If you go to, I don't know how you find them, other than if you go to my profile, I'm just at Philippa B, and scroll to the bottom, you can see that I was a speaker in that room. You can click on it and you can play back. Well, I'm probably about to tell you a lot of what we spoke about anyway. So when we spoke about places to do with Arthur, I spoke about Worcester Cathedral, which is where he is buried. We spoke about Ludlow Castle, St Lawrence's Church in Ludlow, which is where his heart is buried. Sarah spoke about Tickenhall Manor, which is in Bewdley, which is very near to me. But you can't see the manor anymore. The what remains of it is in private hands, and the frontage was Georgianified. Is not a word, but in the Georgian era it had a new front put on, and so it looks Georgian, as does a lot of the town of Bewdley, actually, and yet it has medieval roots. It was a port as well. It's an inland port. It's on the River Severn. You wouldn't get big boats up there now, though, because the river hasn't been dredged for a long time. But anyway, so we spoke about these places. So I was focusing on Worcester Cathedral, which again isn't far from me, so it's somewhere I'm quite familiar with, and Arthur's buried there. He has his tomb there. There's a chantry, which you may have heard me say before, is very ornate. It's they call it a perpendicular Gothic. I mean, it's a very it's Gothic, but it's not French Gothic. I think it's called perpendicular Gothic, but I may have that wrong. It's just very ornate to the layperson. Looks quite similar to Henry VII's chapel at Westminster Abbey. And I read somewhere, and I can't remember where, and it was a long time ago, that they think potentially the architect of the chapel at Westminster Abbey also designed Arthur's chantry at Worcester Cathedral, which would make sense because it does look very similar in the style. It's covered in heraldry, his chantry. So you have the badge of his wife, Katherine of Aragon. You have the Beaufort portcullis, of course, the feathers of the Prince of Wales, the Tudor rose. I'm trying to think off the top of my head what else now. I think you've got greyhounds and griffins and all the other things you would expect to see in a Tudor place. And we spoke about on the clubhouse room how come he was buried in Worcester. Now, he was based at Ludlow Castle when he died. It was in April 1502. I think, was it 1502 or 1503? Someone Google for me. And but either way, April. So it's a wet time of year quite often in England. So we're talking 500 years ago as well. So the climate was slightly different. No made roads, etc., etc. Getting the body back to London would have been a long job. However, that is probably not the actual reason why he's not buried in London. Worcester Cathedral already had royal connections. So you've got King John buried there. King John, by the way, is going to be a topic of one of our History After Dark episodes soon, because he deserves to be discussed in one of our History After Dark rooms. Anyone who doesn't know about History After Dark, it's a gloves off look at history, the people, events, things that what do we say? No, you don't listen at work, maybe. You probably want to put your earphones in if there's little people around, and it's possibly not stuff you discuss at the dinner table, but we do it in History After Dark. Hi Stuart, welcome. And it is it's always at 8:15 on a Wednesday on Instagram. So check out my story, because we rotate around my handle, Katrina.Marchant, who's Dr. Cat Reading the Past on YouTube, and Catherine Brooks, who's the Tudor Tracker. Anyway, so King John will be a topic in History After Dark. But King John was already buried at Worcester Cathedral. So despite the fact that he was basically a insert insult there, it's got royal connections. It was also the site of a royal wedding that I can't remember who off the top of my head, but anyway, it had all these connections. It's a doable journey from, oh yeah, this is interesting. So it's a doable journey from Ludlow. Apparently, and this now makes sense, and this is a bit that Sarah, the Tudor travel guide, filled in for me the other day. So he's brought to Tickenhall Manor, which is in Bewdley, and his body lays there for I don't know how long, and then he's taken by boat down to the cathedral in Worcester, which now makes total sense. Janice, I'll tell you in a second. Yes, who we're doing this week. So that makes total sense now that he goes by boat from Bewdley down to Worcester, because Worcester Cathedral is on the River Severn. It caused a lot of issues with Vikings a bit earlier on, but it's on the river, so that makes total sense that he went by river. So I think that's why that's some of the reasons why he's at Worcester. The other biggie is, so Worcester is important enough to have a royal heir buried there, because you've already got a king, but it's got enough reverence, but it's not in London, where you're drawing huge attention to the fact that the heir to the throne has just died. So it's a bit of a balancing act to be done, and was done. Anyway, so that's my synopsis, my ideas as to why he is at Worcester. Janice says, who are we doing this week? We are doing in Visit Tudor Britain this week, Margaret Tudor. So the elder sister of Henry VIII. And she's the one who went up to Scotland to marry James IV. And yeah, we'll be talking about her. So that's going to be cool. I don't actually know a lot about her. I'm relying on, well, not about her, on her journey or the places, because I've got to Scotland twice in my life. We were due to go in 2020 for a tour, so about Mary Queen of Scots. So that didn't happen. So Janice was hoping it was her. Yes. So that's going to be very good. And then, so yeah, so we talked about that. Like I say, you can catch the back up on that. I'll put another link into my my Instagram story so that you can go and watch that afterwards if you want, if you wish to. And then we spoke in the Clubhouse room about Arthur and Catherine's wedding, and I have done a video on YouTube which you can go and check out. I'll tell you a bit more about that in a minute. Michael says, I'd like to know more about Robert Curthose. Curthose, is that how you say it? Okay, I'll add him to the list. So Arthur and Catherine's wedding, really interesting. So I was fortunate enough, and actually I think anyone can do this. If you go onto the National Archives website, you can book for talks. They're live, and I didn't realise they're like weekly. Last week was about Arthur and Catherine's wedding. the preparations for it went on for 2 years in the cathedral. They were married in St Paul's Cathedral, the one that the previous one to the one we have now, because it obviously it burnt down in the Great Fire of London in 1666. It's the fourth one though that was there by then. So they're married in the cathedral. It's taken 2 years to prep the cathedral, but there were so many events which are the run up to the wedding and following the wedding. You have an official handover of Catherine from the Spanish delegation to the English at Baynard's Castle, which doesn't exist anymore. That was on the River Thames. Really, really significant castle, actually. Lots and lots of things happen there. Henry VII, I think, he either went straight there when he first became king, or he spent a lot of time there. But anyway, yes, so there was this official handover. Catherine, there was a series of pageants and a procession that Catherine went on through the city of London. I've covered this all in my video, by the way. They both wore white. They were in white satin, with gold thread and pearls and precious stones. Like, they must have shimmered. They must have looked quite spectacular. So what else was there that was, I mean, there's loads that's interesting, but I mean, you can check out the video. So Henry VIII was, obviously he wasn't Henry VIII at the time, it was Henry, Duke of York, and he actually accompanied Catherine down the aisle. He's only 10 years old at this time and had a great time, apparently. He quite enjoyed being centre of attention, which I suppose would bode well for him, at least, for the future. So they get married at St Paul's, and then they head off. Well, there's more pageantry, and there's a blessing at St Paul's 2 days after the wedding. Of course, the wedding night. So we discussed what happened on the wedding night of Catherine and Arthur. Was the marriage consummated or was it not? Which obviously became extremely relevant 20 years later when Henry VIII, who went on to marry Catherine, wanted to annul his marriage to her. And we discussed all about that, because obviously it's not just the wedding night. They were married for 5 months by the time Arthur died up at Ludlow. Was the marriage consummated at any time then? They're both 15, by the way. They're not adults. So we went through all what could have happened, what might have happened, what would be the reasons for it happening or not happening. It's very interesting. And I did a poll on my Instagram story whether people thought the marriage had been consummated or not. And it was pretty much 50-50, slightly more in favour of yes, the marriage was consummated. Just an opinion. We may never, ever know. I'm not quite sure how we would ever find anything that would say it had been or not. So anyway, check out that video if you're interested. It's also on the podcast as well. So there's an episode on the podcast. So if you just, I don't know if that's more helpful sometimes to just consume while you're cleaning, driving. I don't know. Sometimes it's easier to listen than watch. Now, another couple of really interesting things. These are to do with Elizabeth. Where should I start? Yesterday was the anniversary of Elizabeth I's accession to the throne. Michael says, if it wasn't, he must be very different to most 15-year-old boys. Okay. But I was thinking, one of my things about it was, he is 15. There's a whole heap of nervousness. And add to that the pressure of the fact that this is a marriage that's supposed to work and produce children, not from day one, perhaps, but that is the expectation. There's people around. You have to ask to go to your wife's bedchamber. You have to be accompanied. The level of the barriers, sort of, really, to just having that kind of intimacy, I think, are quite high. And then, of course, there is the theory that perhaps he was developing with testicular cancer, and that's what killed him. That's a theory, and if that had been the case, then he may not actually have been able to consummate the marriage anyway. So anyway, so there's quite a lot about Arthur out, which you might be interested in. So please go and check out those videos and podcasts. Elizabeth then. So Elizabeth comes to the throne in 1558. Good morning, Ali. Welcome. Nice to see you. So Elizabeth, so yesterday, 17th of November, 1558, and Elizabeth comes to the throne. Now, you may have seen on Instagram and Facebook, I shared a picture of the oak in autumn in Hatfield Ground. Now, the legend goes that Elizabeth is sat reading underneath an oak tree in the grounds of Hatfield House, where she's been sent by her half sister Mary, and she's approached by a delegation who've left Mary. Mary's died at St James's Palace in London, and the delegation headed up by yes, thank you, Michael. The delegation, I think, headed by I think it was Nicholas Throckmorton, finds her in the grounds of Hatfield House, and they've brought the ring that was on Mary's finger to prove that that she has died, and that that Elizabeth is now queen, and she I haven't got the quote with me in front of me, but she quotes Psalm 118, and which basically says she quotes it in Latin. She's clever. She has this planned out. Maybe it's on the tip of her tongue. I don't know. and she says, this is God's doing. This is marvelous in our eyes. And of course, our is the royal. It's like the royal we. The monarch and God are sort of one. It is marvelous in our eyes. And someone said to me, could she really have been sat under the oak? It's damp, it's cold. Yesterday was a really sunny day, actually. And again, remember, it's 500 years ago. I don't know the details of the climate at that time, but I do know that it was different. I think it was cooler generally, but remember what they're wearing as well. So, and I think if you're being held prisoner effectively, and you're allowed to go walking around the grounds and have some peace and quiet, it could have been the last piece of peace and quiet she ever had, actually, if you think about it that way. So you can have a look on Instagram for that oak. The oak that she was sat under, or supposedly sat under, no longer exists. The one in its place, I think, was a sapling from that tree, a bit like the Boscobel oak. That's a different story. That's Charles II. But it was planted by our Queen Elizabeth. So Queen Elizabeth II planted that oak that you can now go and see. You can't sit under it though, unless you go over the barrier, which was naughty. You're not allowed to do that. So Elizabeth, Lisa says, was the original chopped down? I imagine it died. I can't see. I don't want to mix up the stories. The Boscobel oak that Charles II hid in famously overnight when he was escaping. I'll read Colleen's comment in a minute. The Boscobel oak that Charles II hid in, it died because of Victorian times. We got very nostalgic about our history, very interested all of a sudden, and people had more leisure time and could travel places. Anyway, with the oak, people took pieces of bark, for souvenirs, and it kills the trees. So I'm not sure. I don't want to mix up my stories. I know that happened with the Boscobel oak. I'm wondering whether it happened with the Hatfield oak, or it could have just died because because trees die. I don't know. But but obviously the place is, the location of it is known, and at least we got, I like that follow-on story. If we can't have the original, the fact that our Queen Elizabeth uh, uh, you know planted the one that's there now is quite a nice follow-on story, isn't it? Colleen says she knew Mary's death was near. She was chilling. She's thinking, this is the last bit of peace and quiet I'm going to be allowed for a while. She would be correct, wouldn't she? She would be correct. So I have a video about Elizabeth and Mary and that transition of power. Now, of course, we've got a female to female change of power there, which we did have with Jane and Mary, but that's under very different circumstances. So it's a peaceful transition of power. And it's interesting thinking of it from Mary's point of view. She brought in so you've got the Reformation, so it'd be the Counter-Reformation, and her religion was so important to her. And yet when it came to it, she picked family over the do I say over religion? Do you see what I mean though? No, she had big hopes that Elizabeth would continue with her work, but I think she was a bit delusional in that, if she really believed that that was going to happen. But by Elizabeth quoting, by the way, that psalm and doing it in Latin, so she's quoting the Bible and the New Testament, and she's quoting it in Latin. So it's not offensive to either faction, which makes me think she'd already thought through what she was going to say. That's kind of shows, Elizabeth I think she did try to tread a line between the factions. Alice says, how down to the last minute did Mary choose Elizabeth? I still don't understand why, after a life of devout religion, you'd choose family, especially since she must have held a grudge against her. And Tracy says, did she honour her father's wishes? Marion, I'll come back to your comment in a minute. I think it was very late on, actually, that Mary did choose, that she confirmed it as Elizabeth. I just think that was probably quite human, actually. I need to know more about it, but I think it's quite human in that she just, she thought she was pregnant twice. She thought she was pregnant, and apparently her, oh goodness, Deb Royal was telling me yesterday, was it Mary's effigy, which we don't see now because it's not there. She's in the tomb with Elizabeth, and it's Elizabeth that you see, actually has a belly. So it sounds like whatever killed her, if it was uterine cancer or something, she was really poorly with it. Yeah, clean. Yeah, Mary thought so. I don't know if she just was holding out hope to the very last minute. Maybe she had genuine affection for Elizabeth. Who else was there? Mary Queen of Scots. I don't know. Maybe she just decided, and yes, maybe with respect to her father, but she wasn't that bothered about respecting his wishes in life until she was forced to. It's a really interesting one, isn't it? It is a really interesting one. Colleen said, Marion said, the life of Lady Jane Grey is a sad one. I wonder what she would have been like. Yeah, interesting. Michael says, I think the Tudors were cursed and they killed the rightful king, Richard III. Wow, so that's back to kind of an idea that God punishes. It's interesting though, isn't it? At a time where everything that happens is down to God and his choice, and yet Henry says, oh, but that what I've done has gone against God. I can't square it, to be honest. Colleen says she had to follow Henry's will, otherwise it would have been chaos. Maybe she learned from the Lady Jane Grey incident that she was. I mean, Mary got the upper hand in that, but it did show, didn't it? that people were, I mean, they were behind Mary. That's how come she managed to get the throne back so fast. But it's an interesting one. Now, I'm going to show you some cool stuff now. So yesterday I went to see the Elizabeth and Mary Queen of Scots exhibition. Now, I've shown you one of these before already. Now, these are created by Tudor Times, my friend Deb Royal and her friend at Tudor Times. And I bought this one at the exhibition. Oh, Ali, why were Margaret Tudor's children not to be in the succession? I think the Scots pissed Henry off too much. there's my summary. I think he didn't want the Scot line. He didn't want James's line in the in the succession for England. I think. Feel free to disagree or put a different viewpoint ahead forward, but because it's a bit odd, isn't it? Why when you're struggling for a line of succession do you wipe out a whole line? So I picked this one up. So I think I've already shown you Elizabeth's one, but there's a Mary Queen of Scots one as well, and Deb and her partner's done such a fabulous job. It's basically a yearless diary, you know, where you don't have the year in, so you can it's a perpetual diary, that's what they're called, isn't it? But it's got events which are pertinent to Mary Queen of Scots daily, and also then focus articles on a place and an event. So anyway, I picked up one of those. They are really good, Ali. They're really good. And you know, I said, did you produce this for love? And she's like, pretty much, yeah. So, you know, support them if you think that. I think they're brilliant. So have one of those. But the reason I got that was because I was at the British Library. I was with Deb yesterday. You may have seen my photo on Instagram at the Elizabeth I and Mary Queen of Scots exhibition, which is on until is there a date in here? I think it's until February. And in detail, I don't know, if you go to tudortimes.com, you see if they ship to India. I know they ship to America, Ali. I know they ship to America. So Anindita, maybe they will ship worldwide. So that would be good, wouldn't it? Now look at this bad boy. Oh. So I took yesterday nearly 800 photographs. You're allowed to take photographs at the exhibitions now. Yay! Before we move on, Michael says Henry provoked the war with Scotland, so having James's heirs would have been a Scottish ultimate victory. That's a very good point. Yeah. Joanne says to have a look at Book Depository. Thank you for that. Now, this exhibition, so they're equally weighted, which is nice, and it goes through the story of the women's childhoods, and then obviously how they came into contact, but not physical contact, interwoven into each other's lives. And there are artifacts in there that I thought I never even thought I would see. Letters that you've heard of. So the letter that announced Elizabeth's birth, the arrival of a Prince S, and they have to add the S. That letter, one of those letters is there. The checkers ring. So it is so tiny. I know everyone says it's tiny. There's a few things about the checkers ring that I didn't realise. I did know it was tiny. It's really difficult to take a photograph of, though, in the exhibition, because it's in a glass. I do CrossFit, Colleen. I used to be a coach, a CrossFit coach. So the glass display cabinet is as deep as it would be for the rest of the artifacts, and I think it meant that you couldn't get that close to the ring to really see any detail. But So there were things that I hadn't realised about it. That I hadn't realised it's made of mother of pearl. So the actual what do you call it on a ring? So the actual sort of ring bit is mother of pearl. So it's quite wide. It's quite thick, and on the back of it, I can't show you because I've had to use my phone today to stream because I usually use my iPad, and my daughter used it and used up all the battery. That's what happens when you have children. They use all your devices and use up all your battery. But I'll tell you what, I'll post one later. The back there's a stamp of Phoenix. Marion, when was the ring made for Elizabeth? Well, this is a bit of a mystery. There is no record of it being requested, requested, you know what I mean, commissioned. So we don't know whether it was a gift. We don't know if she had it done for herself. I'm absolutely convinced now that it's Anne Boleyn, the other portrait. So for anyone who doesn't know what the Chequers ring is, it's a ring that Elizabeth it's a ring that Elizabeth I wore. It's a locket ring, and there's two. They're not portraits, though. They're, what would you call them? Because they're almost carved into it. I don't know what they're called. One is the face of Elizabeth, very, very easily identifiable as Elizabeth, and then the other is like, oh, who's this woman? And there's lots of different theories put forward. Is it Catherine Parr? Who else is put forward as a possible? But of course, her mother Anne Boleyn is also cameos. Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Her mother Anne Boleyn obviously is put forward as a candidate as well. And I just think it is. Who else? Why would you have? Who else could it be? Yeah. Yeah, Marion, Kate Ashley could be her governess. I mean, Kate Ashley was very, very important to Elizabeth. She's the one that she's quoted about. God, this is going back in my memory banks. That you owe, one owes their upbringing, that owes basically their something to those who bring us up, not to those who brought us into the world. They do just what is natural to them. I have paraphrased that heavily because it's a very long time since I heard it. But yeah, but she's her governess, and this is a mother of pearl ring with gold, rubies. So on the outside of the locket, on the lid, if you like, is an E. I think the E is in diamonds. God, it wasn't. It was open, obviously, because you want to see on the inside. So it is tiny. It is tiny, but I hadn't realised that there was a stamp on the back. You never see a picture of the stamp on the back. There was, like I said, the letter announcing Elizabeth's birth, and oh goodness, honestly, the you get a little bit snowblind, which sounds so bad, doesn't it? Because you see Elizabeth's signature, you're like, oh, it's Elizabeth's signature. Look at it. And then there's another one and another one and another one. Of course, they're all really important documents in the, don't get me wrong, in the in the story. And you see her last letter as well. So you see her the last time. I will have a go at that, Marion. Sorry, I am just blocking someone. I think that's done. Sorry, just had to block someone on YouTube. So interesting, on YouTube today, I've started to put it on so that only people who subscribe to the account can make a comment, but that evidently hasn't helped that happen. So anyway, where was I, everybody? So what else was there? I mean, I love this book. Do you know, it's not just it's not even just a record of the things that are in the exhibition, which is what I thought it would be. But they do a really big write-up about everything. There is, now I've talked about Tutbi Castle a lot. Oh, her signature, Colleen, thank you. Yeah, so her last letter, and you see it's to James, I think it was to James, James VI of Scotland, and she actually apologizes in it for her writing, but as a show of respect, reverence, but I don't know what the right word would be. She has handwritten the letter, because of course she could and did a lot dictate a letter, someone else would write it, but she writes it herself, and her signature, the writing is a lot more well, it's just difficult. It's difficult for her to write. She's having trouble writing by this point, and it's a little bit more scrawly, but obviously with the signature, because that's something you've seen exact on other documents, you can see the difference. Obviously Mary Queen of Scots is captive in England for about 20 years at various places. One of those places that I've spoken to you a lot about is Tutbi Castle, and there's a plan. Can you see that? There's a plan of Tutbury Castle as it was when Mary was going to go there, and where they kept her. So that was really interesting, because having gone, so I'm presuming you can get this online, by the way. I'm not meaning to just tease you with a book that you can't get, because I've picked up books from exhibitions before that I've not managed to go to. So I hope I'm not showing you something you can't get hold of. I think you should be able to. There's, oh goodness, honestly, there's the Clouet. Is that how you pronounce it? Clouet. You know me, my French pronunciation. I didn't do French for very long. I did it for a couple of years, and I did German, which was very helpful when I was interrailing and needed a coffee. It impressed the kids no end. That is literally all I said, though, which is, it's nearer to English. It's so near to English. But this portrait of Mary Queen of Scots in mourning after the death of Francis, her husband, King, the Dauphin. Oh God, honestly, it's. I actually haven't digested it all yet, as you can probably tell. So for patrons, like I say, I'm going to. Jenny says that she's seen it in their online shop. Good. So I'm not teasing you. Oh, the Tide letter's there. The Tide letter. You know about the Tide letter? So this is the letter that Elizabeth writes to Mary. Basically, so when Elizabeth is suspected as having something to do with the Wyatt Rebellion, which ends up being the one that means Jane has to die. Is it that one? Is that after? Is that another one? Anyway, so she's supposed to be being taken to. I think she's supposed to be taken to the Tower, isn't she? She's at Whitehall, so that's also on the river, and she writes the letter, and she takes so long to write the letter. Yes, I know, Janice. She takes so long to write the letter that the tide has turned and they can't take her. But it's famous because it's got these. She's so paranoid someone's going to add something to her letter that she puts in these. Michael says, I'm surprised Babington was allowed to read private letters, but then again, having worked for them, that's silly. Stuart, must first watch of your live. I love this. Oh, thank you, Stuart. Sometimes I'm a bit all over the place, but it's because I've covered so much in 1 week. It can get difficult to remember everything. But anyway, I will share, like I say, some photos on Instagram of the exhibition. I will share even more with patrons and members on YouTube. So please do check that out if you're interested in helping me out and supporting me, because I do appreciate it. We do quite a lot more, believe it or not, over on Patreon and in the membership. Oh yes, there's a plan of Mary's trial and how that is going to be. set out. And there's also this one, which you'll recognise, of her execution. It took me 3 hours. 3 hours to go around the exhibition, and then it continues in to James James VI becoming James I of England. Obviously, he was simultaneously James VI of Scotland and James I of England. The book cost, well, its list price is 30, but I think if you have a look, it's got some money off at the moment. Janice says it's a great summary of events. Thank you. Now, I'll tell you something. Another interesting thing that I picked up on. Now, they've done, at the end of the exhibition, they've done recreations of the effigies of Elizabeth and of Mary Queen of Scots, the ones that are in Westminster Abbey. If you've been to Westminster Abbey and you've seen their tombs, you can't see them, if you know what I mean. You can see them from the side. You can't go over the top, and unless you're very tall. I'm not very tall. I'm very short, so I don't get to see anything from much of a height. And they've recreated them. And what's really, Janice says £25 plus postage. So yeah, they have discounted a bit. And see, you can't even tell on this angle, but I managed to get a photo from straight on of the recreation, and she's really jowly, like she says, having jowls herself. Really jowly, like her face looks different. I'll share it and you can make up your own mind, but it just, I'm not passing any kind of judgment on it. It's just that she looked different. It was odd. Just from a slightly different angle, she looked a lot older. So anyway, so that was an amazing exhibition. Like I say, I'm going to get my thoughts together. I'll share some more photos and interesting things. There was a medallion. See, I'm nosy, so I go and look really close at things. But like I said, it took 3 hours. Me and Deb Royal. I was with Deb Royal from Tudor Times. We were in need of some serious sustenance by the end. But there's a medallion which you'll recognise, and I went around the back of that. That also has the phoenix on the back. Yeah. So anyway, just very, very interesting. If you can get to it, do, because you won't regret it. It was good. So what else? I've done a video about Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. Did they get married at Dover Castle or Dover? Dover Castle would be the most likely, if they did, place in November 1532. It would have been. Now, I've done a video also back in, was it January 1533 that they were married at Whitehall at the Holbein Gate, which don't know exists. There's a video about that as well. But there's an account, I think it's Edward Hall, who writes down that Henry and Anne were married at Dover on their return from France. This is when Anne was taken, she was just treated as queen consort and recognised as Henry's sort of wife in waiting. And we know, or suspect, I don't know how we know, that they did sleep together on the return leg of that journey from France. Anne had held out for like 6 years by this point. So it makes a bit of sense that vows had to have been, or promises had to have been exchanged for her to sleep with him. I mean, can you imagine getting this far and then just giving in anyway, and him going, oh, okay, cool, you can be my mistress now. Although obviously they were very keen to have a legitimate heir. But then they get married. Well, if they got married the first time, they get married again at Whitehall. Both, though, very quiet. Oh, that was one of the things about one of the things about Arthur and Catherine's wedding, Arthur Tudor and Catherine of Aragon's wedding, is it was a massive public wedding, which you hadn't had in living memory and didn't have until the wedding of Mary and Philip of Spain. So that's I sort of knew that, but it hadn't clicked in my head that that was the case. Morning, John from New Jersey. Yes, I wonder. I don't know if okay. I don't know if they ever go on tour. Do you know the one exhibition I missed at the British Library, and I've listened to the book now 3 times, and I've got the book, although my daughter's lost it. It's the History of Magic one, the Harry Potter one. Because the amount of historical basis that J.K. Rowling has for her inspiration for everything is really incredible. It's really interesting. And the Audible book, by the way, is narrated by Natalie Dormer, who played Anne Boleyn in the Tudors series. Really amazing. Like she's amazing. She's also great to fall asleep to, if you're interested. I think I've probably told you that before, but I've been falling asleep to Natalie Dormer now for about 2 weeks. Right. We're over the hour mark. So I'm just going to let you know a couple of things that are coming up that are in the pipeline, because I can see you again tomorrow if you're around. 4 o'clock on my Instagram. We're doing Visit Tudor Britain, and we're looking at Margaret Tudor. And then straight away on Clubhouse, it's myself and Katherine Brooks for History Half Hour of a Friday. And then we didn't have a History After Dark this week, so we're back next week. We may well do John. We may well do John. Monday, we've also got a History Half Hour, which we will be talking about our favourite historical exhibitions. So past, present and future. Michael says, read The Secret Teachings of All Ages. Oh, okay. I like having book recommendations as well. Colleen, yes, Anne's Falcon badge. The carving, I did cover it last week, and I've done a post about it on Instagram, but happy to talk about it again. So Paul Fitzsimmons, who is a antiques dealer, he deals in 15th and 16th century antiques. In fact, I have a friend who has a Tudor manor house who wrote to me, and she said, did you see that my antiques dealer has found Anne's badge, which I thought was very cute that she has her own antiques dealer. Yes, amazing. So Anne's badge, for any of you who didn't know, a Anne's Falcon badge, so a carved, so it's wood, but it's like a ceiling. I'm going to say boss because I've no idea if in wood they're still called a boss. Paul Fitzsimmons discovered this at an auction. He paid £75 for it. It's now worth something like 200,000. I'm sure it might even go for more if he did try and sell it. Had it cleaned up, and it's Anne's badge, probably from her. Tracy Borman thinks from Anne's private apartments at Hampton Court Palace, because it was get-atable. So probably not from somewhere like the Great Hall, which, if you've ever been, is very high. but it could have been got at for in the private apartments and taken and kept either to pass on or as a by Anne supporter as some sort of souvenir. So it's being rediscovered, and it will be on display at Hampton Court Palace. I'm really hoping that by the time I'm taking the Anne Boleyn tour there in May, that it will be on display. Tracy's hopeful, so fingers crossed. It's a fabulous story, and I think I said last week, and I'll keep saying things like this: when things are discovered, that just shows how much is out there ready to be discovered, and it can start. Let's have an open mind, because as things are found, then it can change what we think we know about what happened. Lisa says she missed History After Dark. Yes, I'm so sorry. We had to cancel. We had illnesses and clashes and all sorts, so we couldn't go ahead this week. So sorry about that, but we're back next week. History After Dark will soon be a podcast as well. I am editing all of that together, so any shows you've missed, you'll probably find come up again in the next few weeks when we launch that. I haven't got a date for launching it yet. We are talking about doing some in-person History After Dark. So some history after dark on the road in the future may well be a thing. So Stuart Brown says best history period was surely Henry and Jane. Marion, can I get your podcast in the US? Yes, you can, because you can get it through Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, other ones I've never heard of. If you go to, after this is finished, if you go to my channel, you'll see on the right hand side there are some icons. One of those is to the podcast. It's just called British History, which is actually when you just put that in the search, comes up with obviously 1,000,001 different podcasts. So, but there's my smiley face on the icon for it. So hopefully you'll be able to find it. There's a lot of episodes on there now. One thing, can I just say, to support people like me, creators, there's free ways you can help support, obviously by subscribing and things like that. But if they are monetized, and I am now, letting you don't have to watch all the adverts, by the way, but having the odd advert, just let it roll, and whatever, it just helps support. And that's going to be the same on the podcast as well. Thankfully I've got monetized on there as well, which all just helps me stay here and stay creating. Now I am going to have to go because I'm interviewing Leslie Smith from Tutbi Castle in about 15 minutes time for the podcast. So thank you all so much. Patrons, make sure you've given me your questions for Tracy Borman. I've asked for questions from the patrons because I'm interviewing Tracy next week. So a lot of you have already submitted your questions, but if you are a patron, then get over there and onto patreon.com/British History and pop your questions in there for Tracy. I will let her know who's asked the questions as well, of course. But for now, I think I have probably taken up enough of your time already this week. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. God bless. And I will see you all really, really soon. Bye. Bye, everyone.